All right, so let's dive into this blog about fasting. I have to admit, the title, On Fasting, this is what you've been looking for, definitely got my attention. Plus, the whole aesthetic is kind of mysterious. Simple layout, dated February 15, 2025. But with this symbol next to it, what do you make of that?
Well, symbols can hold a lot of meaning, especially in spiritual contexts. Perhaps it's a clue to the deeper themes the blog explores.
Right. And the other blog post titles just add to the intrigue. We've got The Story of Mystery, Myths, Mandala, and Mathematics, Problems of the Western Zen Buddhism and the Vedanta, and even Apoptosis of Philosophers and Scientists talk about a range of topics. Maybe we'll have to circle back to those later. But for now, let's stick with fasting. One of the first things that jumped out at me from the post is this idea that hunger and thirst are ancient, fundamental drives that help sharpen your focus. Have you ever experienced that?
It's a fascinating point, and I think it taps into something we often overlook in our modern world of instant gratification. When you strip away all the distractions and really tune into those basic needs, it can be a powerful way to cut through the noise and focus on what truly matters.
It's almost like the mindfulness exercises where you're encouraged to sit with discomfort, whether it's physical pain or intense emotions. By not resisting it, you actually become more aware.
Exactly. And this blog post takes that concept a step further, suggesting that you can harness the intensity of those basic needs, like hunger and thirst, and direct them towards a chosen point of concentration.
So instead of just enduring hunger, you're actively using it to fuel your focus, maybe even your spiritual practice.
Precisely. The blog specifically mentions directing that focus towards the one to whom the fast is dedicated.
Okay, now that's interesting. It's like taking this primal urge and giving it a higher purpose. It's not just about deprivation, it's about transformation.
Right, and this leads into the next point the blog makes about fasting detoxifying both the body and mind. It mentions dehydration flushing out toxins, and calorie restriction forcing cells to break down unnecessary components.
I've heard people say they feel lighter and more clear-headed when they fast. Is there any scientific basis for that, or is it all just placebo?
There's definitely some science to it. When you're dehydrated, your body prioritizes eliminating waste products. And calorie restriction triggers a process called autophagy, where your cells essentially clean house and recycle damaged components. It's like hitting the reset button on your cells.
So is this what people mean when they talk about feeling lighter after a fast? Does the science back that up?
It's certainly possible. While more research is always needed, some studies suggest that the process of cellular cleansing can have a positive impact on cognitive function and mood. It makes sense. If your cells are functioning more efficiently, your mind might feel clearer too.
That's fascinating. But the blog post goes even deeper, claiming that our constant food consumption actually dulls our perception. It talks about receptors and enzymes and how overeating leads to something called downregulation. To be honest, that part went a little over my head.
Don't worry, it's a complex concept. Think of it this way. You have these receptors in your body that act like tiny antennas, picking up signals from your environment, including taste and smell. When you eat a lot, especially processed foods or sugary drinks, you're bombarding those receptors with intense signals.
Okay, I'm with you so far.
Over time, those receptors can become less sensitive, like they're getting tired of all the noise. That's downregulation. It's like turning down the volume on your senses.
So basically, overeating makes us less perceptive to the subtleties of the world around us.
Exactly. And the blog post suggests that fasting can help reverse that process. By giving your body a break from the constant influx of food, you allow those receptors to reset and become more sensitive again.
Interesting. It's like fasting is a way to recalibrate our senses and experience the world with more clarity and vibrancy.
That's one way to look at it. And it ties back to the idea of fasting enhancing your focus. By reducing the noise from all the excess input, you can better tune into the signals that truly matter.
This is making me rethink my whole relationship with food. I always thought of fasting as this extreme practice, but now I'm seeing it in a whole new light. It's less about deprivation and more about strategically using periods of restriction to optimize our physical and mental well-being.
That's a great way to put it. And this brings us to another intriguing point the blog post raises, the connection between fasting longevity and eternal life.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting. What does the blog have to say about that?
Well, the blog post frames it as calorie restriction being a path to longevity, potentially even eternal life. But it seemed to be talking about more than just living longer in the physical sense. It's suggesting that fasting can lead to a deeper connection with the divine, a sense of transcendence that goes beyond our physical limitations.
That reminds me of how fasting is incorporated into so many different spiritual traditions. It's definitely not just a new fad diet. It's a practice that's been around for centuries.
Exactly. And while the specific practices might differ, the underlying goal often revolves around purifying the soul, quieting the ego, and becoming more receptive to a higher power.
So, in this context, eternal life is more about cultivating a timeless awareness, a spiritual connection that endures beyond the physical lifespan.
That's a really insightful way to put it. The blog specifically talks about how fasting can help us detach from worldly desires and focus on cultivating a deeper connection with the source. It's a theme that resonates across many spiritual traditions.
Now that you mention it, the blog post does spend quite a bit of time talking about Sawm, the practice of fasting during Ramadan in Islam. What makes Sawm so special, and how does it fit into these broader concept of fasting for spiritual growth?
Well, for those unfamiliar, Sawm is one of the 5 pillars of Islam, and it involves abstaining from food and drink from dawn till dusk during the month of Ramadan. But it's about so much more than just physical deprivation.
It's interesting because the blog post quotes a few verses from the Quran about Sawm. One that stood out to me was, O you who has believed decreed upon you is fasting, as it was decreed upon those before you, that you may become righteous. It seems to suggest that fasting is a universal practice, not just something limited to Islam.
That's a really important point, and it highlights how fasting has been used throughout history as a way to cultivate self-discipline, humility, and a deeper connection with the divine. It's a way to cleanse the soul and align yourself with a higher purpose.
The blog post also mentions how song helps develop empathy for the less fortunate. It quotes the Quran saying, but to fast is best for you if you only ne'er. It's like it's hinting at all these deeper benefits that go beyond just the physical.
I think that's a beautiful way to look at it. By experiencing hunger ourselves, we gain a deeper understanding of the struggles faced by those who don't have enough to eat. It can foster a sense of compassion and a desire to help those in need.
So it's not just about personal transformation, it's about cultivating social responsibility as well.
Exactly. And the blog emphasizes this, suggesting that Psalm help us align our actions with divine intentions. By purifying ourselves both physically and spiritually, we become more attuned to the needs of others and more likely to act in ways that benefit the whole community.
That's such a powerful idea. It's like fasting creates this bridge between our inner world and the outer world, connecting personal growth with social justice.
And it reminds us that true spirituality is not just about individual enlightenment. It's about using our understanding and compassion to make the world a better place.
I love that perspective. It's giving me a lot to think about, especially in terms of how I might incorporate some form of fasting into my own life. Now, the blog post does say to Google it for more information on the benefits of fasting. And I have to admit, I'm curious. I'm wondering what kind of research is out there and what other insights we might find.
Well, that's the beauty of this deep dive. It's just the beginning of the journey. There's a whole world of knowledge out there about fasting, from scientific studies to cultural perspective to personal anecdotes. And I think it's important to be open to exploring all those different facets.
Right. It's not about blindly accepting everything we read, but about being curious and critically evaluating the information we come across, and maybe even challenging our own assumptions along the way.
Absolutely. And I think that's what makes this blog post so intriguing. It's not just telling us what to think. It's inviting us to think for ourselves, to explore this topic with open minds and hearts.
Before we wrap up, I just want to recap what we've learned so far. We've covered how fasting can help sharpen our focus, cleanse our bodies and minds, and enhance our perception. We've also explored how fasting is a powerful tool for spiritual growth and social responsibility.
And we've seen how these benefits are all interconnected, how the physical act of fasting can lead to profound transformations in our mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being.
It really feels like we've only scratched the surface here. And speaking of scratching the surface, this blog post has me itching to explore those other intriguing titles, especially the story of mystery, myths, Mandela, and mathematics. I mean, come on, how can you not be curious about that?
I know, right? It's like this blog is a doorway to a whole universe of fascinating ideas. But before we get lost down that rabbit hole, maybe we should pause and consider what all of this means for you. What are you taking away from this deep dive into fasting?
That's a great point. We've covered a lot of ground, from the science of cellular cleansing to the spiritual concept of eternal life. It's definitely given me a new perspective on fasting, that's for sure.
Has anything surprised you, or maybe sparked an idea you'd like to explore further?
Honestly, I think what surprised me the most was the idea that fasting can actually enhance our senses and make us more perceptive to the world around us. I always thought of it as this restrictive practice, but now I'm seeing it as a way to potentially heighten our experiences.
That's a really interesting takeaway, and it speaks to the power of shifting our perspective. Sometimes by letting go of something, we create space for something even greater to emerge.
I like that. Letting go to create space. It's like fasting isn't just about taking something away, it's about making room for something new, something more meaningful.
Exactly. And that something new could be anything from a deeper spiritual connection to a renewed sense of clarity and focus in your daily life. It's really up to you to define what that looks like.
I think that's what makes this blog post so powerful. It's not prescriptive, it's invitational. It's saying, here are some ideas, now go explore them for yourself and see what resonates.
And I think that's a great note to end on. This deep dive has given you a taste of the fascinating world of fasting. But the real journey begins when you take what you've learned and apply it to your own life.
So if I'm feeling inspired by what we've discussed today, maybe consider doing a little research on fasting practices that align with your interests and goals. There's a wealth of information out there, from scientific studies to spiritual texts to personal accounts. And who knows, maybe you'll even feel drawn to explore some of those other thought-provoking blog posts on the website.
I have a feeling we'll be revisiting this blog again soon. Those titles are just too intriguing to resist.
Agreed, but for now, let's savor the insights we've gained about fasting. It's a practice that has stood the test of time, offering a wealth of benefits for those willing to explore its depths.
And remember, the key is to approach it with an open mind, a sense of curiosity, and a willingness to listen to your own body and intuition.
Beautifully said. Until next time, keep seeking, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.